Today's episode is brought to you by National Carriers, Tab Bank, Carter Lumber, Drivewise, and Truck Parking Club. We have a special edition for you today on Talk CDL Trucking Podcast. We sit down and we interview former FBI Assistant Director Frank Figliuzzi. He wrote a book called Long Haul, Hunting the Highway Serial Killers. Enjoy the show. All right, read to me that bio you have on the FBI man that we're about to interview, Frank Figliuzzi.
Well, he is a retired FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence. He spent 25 years as an FBI Special Agent. He has been a national security contributor for NBC News for almost 7 years and appeared live on television for 2,000 times at least. He's authored a national best-selling book, The FBI Way, Inside the Bureau's Code of Excellence, and he's now wrote this new book, Long Haul, Hunting the Highway Serial Killers, which was released this past May. During his career, he was named the FBI's chief inspector overseeing the most sensitive and complex internal inquiries and audits worldwide, and he's led hundreds of investigations resulting in the arrests, convictions of numerous spies, terrorists, white-collar criminals, and corrupt public officials.
Wow, nice bio.
Yeah.
I mean, that's better than mine. Truck driver and now podcast host. Okay, Frank. I'll tell you what, honestly, I got to be honest. I'm excited about this interview.
Oh, I am too.
I'm excited for a couple reasons. Obviously, he's a Phoebe guy, right?
Phoebe.
You remember on, what was the show called with Al Bundy? What was it?
Married with Children.
Married with Children. Remember when the FBI raided the house and she goes, Yee, and they had the jackets that said FBI on it. And she's like, you get out of here, you Phoebe guys. But I am excited, to have a retired FBI guy on. And honestly, it's something that, and you know this, I've always been a serial killer buff. It's something that I've always loved. I don't want to say loved. You're looking at me weird. Like, I've always known. Like, I know serial killer names. I read one book my entire life, an entire book. I've read the Bible, and the other book that I've ever read was a book called The Hillside Stranglers. And didn't I tell you about all that?
Yes.
Okay. I thought so. You were looking at me like, okay. So anyways, I'm excited about it because I've always taken an interest in, serial killers. I really have. I mean, I'm not going to deny it. It doesn't make me a serial killer, so don't look at me like that,
Oh, I'm not. I'm very, very involved in that part of it too. I love forensics. I love all that kind of things. So
you think about the mind of somebody that, again, just craves something like that. I'm going to ask him, is it a mental thing with these guys? I am really curious to see, in their studies and everything, like what they have, discovered about, I don't want to call it the professionalism of serial killers, but, obviously, some of these guys have gotten away with quite a bit.
Oh, yeah. That's when you read his book, there are quite a few things that they might have caught a killer, but they were still disappointed in certain things of it because of the judicial system. Like one of the specific killers, they were only able to charge him with 2 things because he pled, but they still felt that the way he was talking, that there was more out there, but they couldn't go any further with it because of the way the judicial system was set up. They convicted him and they have to be happy with what they got, but still knowing that there was more things out there that they could not pin to him was disheartening for a lot of the investigators. And there is a lot involved in the book as far as, the different ones that they had mentioned as far as between the FBI and police agencies and so forth.
Yeah. Okay, well, listen, let's go ahead and dial Frank and get him on the show. Let's take a break first, and then we'll go right into the interview.
Attention trucking companies and truck drivers. If you need help with cash flow, we've got help on the way. Turn to Tab Bank, the bank that knows trucking. Tab Bank has been in the business of helping truck drivers and trucking companies with their cash flow needs for 25 years. It's just that simple. It's what they do. But they don't stop there. Tab Bank helps grow your business with their invoice, factoring, and banking services. What a plus that is. Before you book your next load, play it safe and contact Tab Bank to get their help with your factoring needs. Tab Bank helps determine the credit worthiness of your customers as well as billing and collection efforts on invoices that you factor with them. Let the experts at Tab Bank get you cash quickly for the loads you deliver. Again, it's what they do. Visit tabbank.com/talkcdl to learn more. That's tabbank.com/talkcdl. Tab Bank member FDIC.
If you're a driver looking for a new trucking job, check out NCI. NCI offers the following: new Kenworth T680s, competitive wages, solo, team, and students welcome, plus a full benefit package for you and your family. Check them out today at 888-311-7076. That's 888-7076. And tell them Talk CDL sent you. Hey drivers, are you sick of watching the other drivers bypass the weigh station while you are held up going through yourself? Well, download DriveWise today at www.drivewise.com. That's DRIVEWYZE.com, and start bypassing the scales yourself. If you're a small carrier, an owner-operator, or even a big fleet looking for something better, check out DriveWise today. And remember, there's no equipment, no transponders needed when you're using DriveWise. Check them out for a free download at www.drivewYZE.com. Truck Parking Club is a network of instantly reservable daily and monthly truck parking locations throughout the U.S. Truck Parking Club helps connect truckers to truck parking locations throughout the U.S. via truckparkingclub.com. Our networks is made up of property owners that have locations adequate for truck parking to list on the platform. This includes trucking companies, storage companies, CDL schools, trailer leasing companies, real estate investors, truck parking operators, and more. Go to truckparkingclub.com today. Drivers, if you're looking for a local, home, everyday driving job, apply with Carter Lumber today. They have positions for Class A and Class B local drivers. They can take experienced drivers, students, and non-CDL drivers. With over 160 locations, chances are they have a position for you. So go to carterlumber.com/talkcdl and apply today. Again, that's carterlumber.com/talkcdl. Thank you.
This is Frank.
Hi, Frank. This is Ruth Ann and Troy with Talk CDL. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
All right, so we've got Frank Figliuzzi on the show today. And Frank, we are super duper excited about having you on for many reasons. Number one, you're retired FBI. And by the way, we were sitting here talking about you before we called you, and Ruth Ann did this great bio on you. And then we compared your bio to my bio, and I'm kind of embarrassed.
Oh, my goodness gracious. We've all made our contributions in our own ways, and my life has been a wild ride that apparently is not over yet.
We're excited about having the FBI on, and I got to confess to you, and I was just telling Ruth Ann this, which she knows because we've been married almost 30 years, that I have been a serial killer, sort of a buff over serial killers Since I was a young guy, there's two books I've read my entire life. One was the Bible, and number two was a book called The Hillside Stranglers. If you're familiar with Angelo Bueno and Kenneth Bianchi, they were called the Hillside Stranglers.
I'm familiar with both books. And there's a lot of killing and fascinating stories in the Bible that we could talk about. You've read more than two books.
I mean, sincerely, like, as far as got into books and actually took an interest in certain things, I've never really had an interest. I mean, I've read a lot over my life, but sure. I haven't really read a lot of stories about different people as much as, like, Ruth Ann reads a book a night. She is literally one of those people that reads as she's going to bed. I don't. I just go to bed.
My wife's the same way. Avid reader.
So, we've got a million questions. I think Ruth Ann read this book from front to cover, and we've been talking about it. We've got a million questions, but is there anything that you wanted to start out with before we get into all our questions?
Yeah, I think it's more important than ever to this particular platform we're on and our discussion to point a couple things out. Because, when you write a book about serial killer truckers and people don't necessarily read the book, you can get a response from the trucking community that is, less than pleasant. They could say, "What are you doing to our industry? Are you painting us all with some kind of serial killer brush?" And I'm quick to point out, Troy, that on the very first page of my book, there's a book dedication. And the dedication, in part, is to the stalwart American trucker. This book is not about all truckers being evil killers, but rather much of the book is, in fact, a third of the book is dedicated to the subculture of long-haul truckers and explaining it, learning about it. And I state clearly that I came away from my experience on the road, over 2,000 miles with in a big rig. I happen to ride flatbed. I came away really impressed with modern trucking and the life of a trucker and their impact on the economy, which I studied and is all over the book. I mean, my Lord, $875 billion in gross freight revenue last year from trucking. Grocery stores would run out of goods in 3 days if we stopped trucking. These people are hardworking, often family people, simply trying to put food on their family's table by putting food on our tables. We owe a lot to truckers. And I think I need to emphasize that even more since we're on CDO.
Well, and, we agree with that statement wholeheartedly. In fact, I would tell you the good truck drivers, the ones that are the hardworking ones, they don't take offense to something like this because they're aware that there are some bad eggs, in the industry also. But yes, you are correct. Some people would think we're painting a picture of the industry wrong because we've talked about stuff like this on the show before, and you get mixed reviews all the time. But I would tell you that it's definitely eye-popping when you see some of the numbers you wrote in your book and what's really out there. I've often said that being a truck driver, an over-the-road truck driver, can really be almost... let me just put it this way. If there was five titles or professions or job titles that could make it work as a serial killer and really use their title as a cover, would you say truckers, long-haul trucking would be about the tops?
Yeah, I mean, in the book, I clearly state the research that says by far the number one profession of serial killers is long-haul trucking. I mean, there's nothing even close, Troy. So it's a perfect storm here. You've got the capability. You're on the open road, often in isolated stretches of highway. There's very little accountability, so to speak, as long as you're getting your load from point A to point B on time. There's mandatory downtime, as you well know, where lots of things can happen. And what these truckers are doing is exploiting the gaps in law enforcement. So they'll grab one of their female victims in one jurisdiction. They'll rape and or murder her in a second police jurisdiction, and they'll dump the remains in the third jurisdiction. This makes for an incredible challenge for law enforcement, who often comes upon or finds a reported dead body, no identity, no ID on that body, have no idea how long she's been dead until a coroner can try to guess. No idea where she came from, who did this. And so you mentioned the numbers and the shock factor of the numbers. That's what got me to write this book. People say, oh, well, you were 25 years special agent in the FBI, assistant director. This must have been something you were well immersed in during your career. And the answer is no, I wasn't. I was as shocked as you were. And here are the numbers that got me. How this started was I had a discussion with a woman who said she worked at the FBI, and I said, "Oh, yeah, great. What do you do there?" And she said, "Oh, I'm the head of the Highway Serial Killings Initiative." And I said, "Okay, what are you telling me this is? I've heard a little about this, but are you telling me this is still going on?" And then she hit me with the numbers: 850 murders alongside our nation's highways over just the last few decades. Last couple of decades. 200 of those murders are considered active and unsolved. 450 suspects in the long-haul trucking community for those 200 unsolved murders. And then she adds, 25 long-haul truckers are already doing prison time for multiple homicides, and that has not made a dent in solving the unsolved cases. So that's what caused me to say, okay, hold on. The FBI clearly is not going to talk to me much more about this because they're pending cases. And I'm going to need to get my investigative hat back on. And that's when I made a decision to find a trucker that would tolerate me for over 2,000 miles on the road. So I could dig into three cultures: long-haul truckers, sex trafficked victims, who are by and large the vast majority of the victims we're talking about in this initiative. And the third subculture, which many people are fascinated by, is the crime analyst. Those analysts who have to connect the dots to stop the killing.
And you bring up the trafficking also that's in the industry. Ruth Ann is a big advocate for TAT. I don't know if you've heard of TAT, Truckers Against Trafficking.
Yeah, they're in my book, Truckers Against Trafficking, who now have gone well beyond trucking for their anti-trafficking mission. Mm-hmm. And now they go by TAT exclusively because they are going beyond trucking. Yeah, they're in my book. They do great work. There are hero truckers. Every year, TAT gives out awards for hero truckers who have seen something, done something to get someone out of trafficking. So who better to be the eyes and ears of the anti-trafficking movement on the highways, at least, than long-haul truckers?
Frank, if you had to really sit down and think with technology today, satellite communications and everything that's in trucking now, a lot of people are really trackable big time. Do you think it's getting easier to maybe catch these guys, or because of the trafficking and the runaways that usually that's probably what happens? You've got a lot of people that have been trafficked, or there's runaways, and so there's really nobody tracking them, and they're the victims that are the easier ones to kill. But do you think it's going to get easier to maybe catch these guys with the technology?
Great question. I get into this in the book because it's complicated. But yes, modern day trucking, as you well know, is all about electronic tracking. My goodness, there's a camera facing into the truck in some companies, a camera facing out. There's a GPS tracking. There's an electronic log that can tell an inspector when and where you stopped, and all of this, the way stations, the toll roads, all of this. You're tracked every which way from Sunday in some large companies and some small companies. But here's what I found. So I'm an investigator, so I had to ask this question. I didn't want to write a book that was all blood and gore and killers and not a study of the three subcultures I told you about. So I had to, since I'm an investigator, I wanted to narrow this pool of suspects down, right? Because the FBI is saying they've got 450 suspects. That's unwieldy for me. So I'm like, okay, let's ask the question. Who is most likely, what trucker in what type of truck in what type of corporation is more likely to be a killer. And to answer your question, is modern day trucking with all the tracking making it easier, harder? Are the numbers going down? Are they going up? And here's what I found. First, yeah, heavily tracked today, but not all companies. So should the FBI analysts be looking at smaller companies, not the big corporate ones who do the heavy trafficking? And I start researching some of the cases. And yes, that's a valid question. But I found cases, Troy, where a big-time corporate trucker on his mandatory downtime, 36 hours, usually on a weekend, parks his rig at a truck stop, gets in an Uber or rents a car, and goes off and kills. And, you can track that truck all you want, but it's sitting in that lot for 36 hours. So that's a problem. And law enforcement tells me, since the issue of trafficking has largely, not entirely, but largely moved away from the truck lots, where, of course, the old truckers tell me, the lot lizards were prowling the lot and knocking on our doors. Today, much of that has moved online. That's advertising and soliciting of even trafficked women. I saw it on the road. I would, as we pass through even small towns, I would get online and I'd start exploring, hey, is there sex for money happening here for truckers? And sure enough, it was. And so how does that impact things? Well, you park your rig, you see the ad on your phone. They say trucker friendly, for example. And you go off to a nearby kind of, seedy motel and or massage parlor that's really kind of set up for truckers and interstate travelers. And that's where killing is beginning to happen now. And what does that mean? A couple of things. One, I think it's a far more dangerous environment for the woman, for the trafficking victim. She's alone in this motel room with the stranger. You say, well, it sounds pretty dangerous in a truck and a lot. Well, yes. However, if she kicks and screams and tries to kick out the window, if there's a pimp watching her at the other side of the lot, it's actually potentially safer than the police showing up at a motel room and finding a dead body and not knowing what the hell happened or who did it. So you can make this argument that yes, electronic tracking is making it easier to know where somebody was and all that. But the other thing is, if you've got 1,000 trucks passing a stretch of highway, all being logged and tracked, which one of those, all having stopped recently at the following truck stops for fuel, which one of those was the killer? So, it's interesting. And then I get deeper, which is the kind of trafficking. One of the things that really I was fascinated by was the different kinds of trucking and trucks, even in the long haul community. So as I said, I wrote flatbed, and I asked a really hard kind of behavioral question. Which type of trucking might attract the killer more than the other type of truck? I did flatbed. I was fascinated by the fact that you got to know some math and physics if you're doing flatbed. You've got to know points of securement, weight distribution. Is the load too far forward, too far back? Do we have too much weight on one axle? Can I load my 3 gas tanks, my tanks today? Or is that going to put us overweight? Should I chain this load or strap this load? Does it have to be tarped? If so, how do I do that effectively for this odd-shaped load? That's smart stuff. And that person is actively engaged in their work mentally and physically. We got a workout. Those tarps rolled up, they could be 100 pounds, and we're hoisting them up on top of the load. The chains are heavy. You guys know this stuff. And that's a different kind of trucking. And I say a different kind of person than, say, the other end of the spectrum, which is usually the dry vanner. Very little mental engagement, very little social engagement. Maybe you're opening the back door of the truck. Maybe you're not. Who does that attract? And then all the in between of the strata of trucking, right? You've got reefer trucks, refrigerated trucks. You've got hazmat drivers, wide load, low boys, heavy load. I mean, all of this is in the book, and I ask some questions about that if we're trying to catch the killers.
Yeah, I seen where you asked Mike that question, and there was a couple of things that Mike had said that I could see, but like he said that women shouldn't do it at all. Well, I know a couple of hardcore, that's all they've ever done in their career was flatbed. Yes, you are 100%. I laughed when you said you tossed up the tarp, and I'm like, how did he toss up that tarp? That, my gosh, because I don't know how physically you look, but I know how I would never be able to toss up a tarp, period.
You know what? My editor had the same problem with the word toss. He did. He did. And I don't want people to think I'm Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Well,
no, it was more of a struggle, quite frankly.
Well, I can say Mike was a very good person for you to ride with, because he didn't let, like when you had to go and go back to get your load reloaded. They had to take all of the stuff off and redo it because he refused to travel being overweight. Those kind of situations, like you had mentioned in the book, a lot of times drivers won't go through that extra step. They won't waste that time because time is money. And he really was able to show, no, you don't really want to do this, because if you end up going and getting overweight, then you're going into a lot of harder issues that you have to deal with. So he was a very good person to show that to. The only thing that I wanted to bring to open up the horizon a little bit, if you have a reefer, you have somewhere to keep the person cool to transport them. Just saying.
Yeah. Well, the reefer, one of the things I learned so much here, but the reefer guys and gals, they are part of the climate control of that load. And I didn't realize that. They're not just hauling produce. They have sensors. They know if the humidity is not right, the temperature is not right, moisture is not right. They're responsible for that load. And there's times when they've got to, make it, change the humidity, change the temp, add moisture. It's fascinating to me. And it was also fascinating to me how, this is true for our entire society, is, how they look at the other types of their profession, right? There seemed to be some kind of status or something about, these guys are higher paid. They, the hazmat tankers, or the low boys, or the wide load where you've got a turbine for a windmill. This all was fascinating to me, that human beings all seem to find their tribe and all try to assess, who's better positioned and all of that. That was interesting to me.
Right. And that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, is how did this type of investigating influence you now that you've been in the transportation life?
Well, first, I think, I'm hoping that, how have I been influenced? I more than ever, it's about experiencing what you are investigating. Now, sometimes in law enforcement, you don't have the luxury of this kind of time. No homicide detective out there who's trying to solve one of these unsolved cases is going to take a year of his time or her time riding along 2,000 miles, interviewing trafficking victims and truckers. You don't have that luxury. In fact, quite frankly, some of these rural county sheriffs who are stuck with these cases because that's where the body is found, they don't even have a homicide detective. They do road patrol. They, let alone have a crime analyst who's going to add all of that data that's necessary for the FBI database to do its thing. So, the idea and the encouragement of learning what you're investigating, really important, really hammer home to me as well. Knowing the people, the culture. So I made an effort to, knowing that the trucker I rode along with, Mike, was young. He's in his late 20s. And knowing that trucking has changed drastically, I wanted to make a point of finding a much older trucker. And I found a retired guy who, of course, is in the book, in a retirement community in Arizona. And, I wanted to get his reality. And that's where we started learning the drug use back then, which is essentially amphetamines. And then the alcohol used to come down after the amphetamines. This was, and then, what really went on at truck stops and even brothels in the old days. He specifically cited Tennessee, where there are brothels set up along the highways to serve as truckers. So I made an effort to get all of that. And Again, I learned so much about trafficking and women survivors. I interviewed women who are not only survivors of being trafficked to truckers and surviving violent encounters, but actually help run resource centers to help women get out of the trafficking trap. you can't you can't avoid, if you're an investigator, talking to victims and talking to experts. I consulted, in the book with 2 PhDs at universities who are hands-on on the street with clinics and centers. And boy, did they educate me as to the commonalities among the trafficking victims, how a young woman can fall into trafficking. And everything they told me was correct when I sat down and interviewed these women. And just as I looked for commonalities among the victims, who was more likely, as we discussed, I asked the question, which trucker is more likely to kill? Well, I asked the same question of the victims. Which type of trafficking victim in which work style of trafficking is more likely to fall prey to a killer?
You were talking about the different trailers. Out of all the convicted serial killers you have they actually gone in there and said, okay, here's the higher percentage of flatbedders and here's the higher percentage of vanners? Do we have those numbers?
So I love this question, but it's a frustrating question because, of course, the FBI would not share with me that data. And so I tried to go out in the private research area and see if that's been done, and it has not been done to my knowledge. So I felt like I was kind of on my own. On my research here, I did see dry vanners. I thought they were more predominant than the other types of truckers. I also believe through my research that the more mom and pop trucking companies or the owner operators were more likely to be the killers. But I'll tell you, just as soon as I was about to draw serious conclusions, I found exceptions to those rules. So, short of the FBI saying, yes, we have a matrix, here it is, this was tough. This was tough to figure out.
I had a question. In the front of your book, there was a map that was from the FBI of 500 cases where there's 500 women dumped, where each dot. Do you know what year that map was from?
Yeah. Well, let me see. I believe it was 2009. I'd have to check and see that. Each one of those red dots represents where a body was found in the initiative. And remember, people might be saying, and maybe we haven't talked enough about what the initiative entails, but it's not that there aren't bodies along the highway that are unrelated to the initiative, like maybe a male. There's a series of murders out there that involve men being killed, but that's not the FBI's initiative. The FBI's initiative specifically is a woman, target of opportunity, often trafficked, within close proximity, last seen within close proximity of a highway, and discovered dead alongside a national highway, an interstate highway. So that's what the red dots are, is that body being found within the initiative. But to answer your question, I think we're looking at 2009, but I've got to confirm.
Well, I know you had a lot of data in there spanning from when Dale, your older gentleman, was in the trucking industry until recent. There was a ton of different situations and different scenes that you have come across that you were able to pull together. But one thing I wanted to mention, like you were saying about how it used to go from some of the trafficking or some of the women that were in the industry of prostitution and stuff to some of the stuff that's now on the more digital or more internet based. And there was one of the subjects that you covered that stated that in the past it was always hard to pinpoint a woman's identity unless it was like a trucker or someone saying, oh yeah, no, I've seen her around, to now they take pictures and you'll have pictures of like tattoos or certain things that are known throughout, like with women and with certain, whether they are driven through the three different categories of prostitution, to where they can help identify where she's from, what type of category she's in. Do you find that is better now at helping solving these cases?
It's a great question, because the digital footprint inevitably is helpful. However, I can't emphasize enough the frustration level here, because amongst law enforcement, because yes, no question about it. City, county, vice departments who handle prostitution generally, and even I'll tell you, we asked about learning things. I've learned from the experts that even the term prostitution is problematic, because in so many of these cases, we're talking about trafficked women, and the experts don't use the term prostitution there unless it's completely voluntary, consensual from the woman. It's traffic victim, not prostitute. But as an aside, yes. So what happens with local vice cops, city vice cops? They frequently take photos of known prostitutes. They take photos of the tattoos, and they put them on file. Here's the problem. Here comes rural county sheriff's deputy, responds to a report of a dead body in the woods near the highway. No way for that county sheriff deputy to access the country's, photos of sex trade women tattoos. There's no such database. It's localized. So does Las Vegas Metro PD have a ton of files on and photos of known prostitutes? Absolutely. Maybe more than any city in the country. Does that help the county sheriff's deputy in Alabama? Not one whit. No. So it helps. It helps in that they could put out a message to the public and say, on TV, anybody know this woman with this tattoo? That's helpful. But even with regard to advertising online, and yes, they usually upload a photo if it's really them. That's helpful. Where was that photo uploaded, and how does that sheriff's deputy find that photo? So let's say that the woman's advertising in the state of Illinois or the Chicago area. Again, we got an Alabama county deputy sheriff. How is he going to find that woman's photo in Illinois? It's almost an impossible task.
Well, I was hoping that maybe it would have helped a little bit more, but I know Terry Turner and Larry Hallmark, they were talking about different equipment, or like the different databases that are now available. And I was hoping that maybe that was getting a little bit more broader. And I know you mentioned about AI, and now that they're starting to pull out. And I was kind of hoping that maybe it was a little bit more stuff being solved. But like I see what you're saying, it's just really hard when you're dealing with the small town situations going against the whole nationwide.
This is exactly why the FBI decided to open up this initiative. And you mentioned Terry Turner, for those who are wondering. I'd love to tell you that this whole initiative was the FBI's original thought, but it wasn't. This whole thing started in 2003 with a crime analyst by the name of Terry Turner. She worked for the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, a state agency. She's the one who first raised her hand and said, hey, hang on here. I've got now 10 young ladies in a span of just a few months. I have 10, she calls them her girls. I have 10 girls who have turned up dead around the country who are from Oklahoma. And I'm seeing a trafficking connection and maybe a trucking connection. And I want to have a meeting. Will my higher-ups please allow me to send a teletype around the country to homicide detectives and ask them if they have women, trafficked women, dead along their highways. And maybe she thinks 8 or 10 detectives will show up. She'll buy coffee and donuts, and they'll talk. Well, dozens of detectives show up from around the country. And she insists that the FBI show up at this meeting. And when the FBI shows up at this meeting and hears all the cases, they say, you absolutely have serial killers, plural, and we're in. We're going to work this with you. We're going to do this. And what does that mean? They set up the Highway Serial Killings Initiative database. And it's run out of Quantico, Virginia, with a team of crime analysts. No badges, no guns, brain power, and computers. And their personal knowledge of cases is what they use. And that's where, if that police department will take the time to answer about 200 questions on an FBI form about their crime scene, about their case, and I mean it is detailed questioning. What's the hair color of your victim? Where was she positioned? Did she have tattoos? What kind of clothing was she wearing? Was she found nude or partially nude? Which part of her body was nude? Was she strangled, shot, or stabbed? Was her body mutilated in any way? Was she face down or face up? Was she stuffed in a trash can or an abandoned refrigerator? If you can answer those 200 questions, that goes into the database. And here comes kind of the magic. I really shouldn't say magic, it's not, but that computer will say, we've seen this before. We saw this crime scene 3 years ago with the redhead who was stabbed in the left part of her chest, who was petite and had freckles and was found half nude, but only on the bottom. Or she was strangled using the same knot that we saw used to strangle this woman 5 years ago. That's how the cases get connected and ultimately get solved.
The redhead, that was the ones that were surrounding the Tennessee area, weren't they?
Yeah, there's a series of murders out there called the redhead murders. And while many people say, oh, yeah, those were solved, we're talking about, well, here's even more confusion. You can't even get a straight number on the redhead murders. But I'm thinking, based on my research, that we're talking about 11 or 12 at the most redhead murders by truckers. And people say, oh, I know who did that. That's been solved. And my answer to that is, yes, some of them have been solved. And I am not convinced that this was all the same killer, nor that the guy who went to prison for some of these was really the killer for all the redheads. And I still consider the redhead murders unsolved.
Frank, what is the estimated amount of active serial killers in the United States? And out of that number, what would you say the percent are long-haul truckers?
All right. So the FBI will not give you a firm number. The best that I could get out of them as to active killers still out there. And I say active killers. They don't retire. People sometimes have this impression that, maybe, I think we all want to think the best thoughts, right? Because it's scary to think of the reality. But so I get a lot of questions about, all right, well, this is kind of stopped, right? And I say, well, okay, if we have 200 unsolved cases just in the FBI's highway initiative, then, and you think that killers retire? No, not really. No, they don't. They don't stop killing. You don't just one day go, oh, okay, I think I'll stop killing now. Doesn't work that way. People do go to prison and then stop killing. Maybe they're charged with burglary, right? And the police don't know, my God, we have a killer that we charge with burglary. They don't know that. But so the question is, where do you go outside the FBI? Since all the FBI will say is there are multiple active serial killers out in the U.S. right now. And yes, there are on the highways as well. Then you look to private research, and the numbers could be anywhere from 35 to 135. That's how unknown this area is.
So out of the 135, what do you think the percent would be truckers?
Very high.
Very high.
Very high. I would place it at greater than 50%.
So here's a question for you. I'm sure you're following the Gilgo Beach killer up there in Long Island, Rex Auerman. I recently read about him. It said they just found on his computer documents. Some were titled "Next Time." Another one he wrote, things to do, reminders to clean the bodies and destroy evidence, get sleep before hunt, have story all set. One section titled "Things to Remember" appears to highlight lessons from previous killings, such as using heavier rope and limiting noise in order to maximize playtime, body preparation, checklist included, among other items. Remove head and hands even. It was just some nasty stuff. So the question I have is, obviously his family, his wife, they thought they were living with this he was a drafter, I guess, some kind of
An architect.
An architect, thank you. And, here's a family that thought they had a husband and a father that, and many times people are living with this serial killer, including truckers' families. They're living with this guy that he hunts by day and night, and then he comes home and puts on his family face. My question is, what are the signs that these people, especially if they suspect something, that this guy's been off, I've never been able to place it, what should they be looking for?
Yeah, this is a fascinating case study that you're referring to, because the man is bright. He's an architect in New York City, lives in a nice suburb in Long Island. And we're finding that his killing largely happened when his wife was out of town. And apparently she was out of town quite a bit, visiting relatives or whatever she was doing. You wonder, of course, if that amount of time with her out of town might have been a reflection of trouble in the marriage. Like, and this is conjecture on my part, but she wasn't out of town for work, as far as I know. So why so much time out of town, even taking the kids with her? Was there kind of an ick factor? Was she concerned? Was it somebody she couldn't really stand to be around much? We're not clear on that. But this was the opportunistic window he would use and plan for. He had the luxury of planning, as you indicated, because he might know in advance when his wife's going to leave town. And so this insight we're getting into the mind of a serial killer through the notes that you're referring to that he would make for himself is truly fascinating. For some of the killer truckers, some of them have been interviewed while in prison, and they went through that mental checklist as well. They had lots of time to drive and think about how I do this better, what I might do next time. And so I'm digressing. You ask what signs and indicators to look for. Look, inevitably for most family members of killers, serial killers, when they're caught, the reaction is shock and surprise. He's a teddy bear. I can recall some girlfriends and wives being interviewed. He's a teddy bear. He would never do anything like this. What are you talking about? So there is a shock factor for sure. Very few cases involve family members saying, yeah, I figured he'd probably kill somebody someday. That almost never happens. So what is it you're looking at here? You actually have to go back to childhood with somebody. I mean, I hate to say this, but when if Frank says, if you're considering marrying someone, please examine their childhood. Well, it's not that simple, but I have to tell you, serial killers don't just happen. They are developed over time. So an abusive childhood, particularly in these cases where there's anger and resentment toward the mother figure. This is present in many of the cases involving the truckers. Horrible abuses in some cases. I mentioned a case in the book called the vampire trucker. Horrible abuse in his childhood, much of it from mom. Abandonment by mom can create all this. And listen, you got to go back even further. The experts will tell you sometimes serial killers start in the womb with genetic and DNA and brain malfunction, so that there's a mental health issue to this right away and a physiology to this. So add into that resentment of women, anger toward women, a history of violence, and now an opportunity to act out that predisposition to violence against women. And for truckers, what's the opportunity? Well, once they've gravitated toward this isolating life, and by the way, in most cases, you're looking at a very antisocial person who prefers to be alone. And then the trucker gets in that truck and goes, my God, I think I could get away with just about anything in this job. Similarly, this architect, Long Island, I'm going to think that light bulb went on. He's going to have all the issues that I'm talking about, likely, or most or some. His wife now frequently gone, whether he forced her out or not, we don't know yet. And he's saying, here goes his light bulb. My God, I have a lot of time alone. I could probably get away with anything. What's the commonality here? It is the targeting of very vulnerable targets. And who are some of the most vulnerable targets in our society? People in the sex trade. Their job is to be alone with a man and get paid for it and be discreet about it. And so what other opportunity does a killer have that's better than that if they're going to target women?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something, the way, you were bringing up childhood, and Dahmer, Ramirez, all those really prolific serial killers that we all know the names of. A lot of them also were abusive with animals, if you recall. So I'm just saying, for signs to be watching for.
Yes, FBI behavioral profilers will tell you there's this kind of unholy trinity, they refer to it as, which is a combination of early violence toward animals, playing with fire, this is as a kid, and thirdly, bedwetting after age 10. Now, I know I can already hear people saying, oh my God, I wet the bed after 10. I'm telling you that it has to be all three: enjoyment of killing animals. And by the way, the profilers tell us that killing cats or torturing cats is particularly indicative of anger toward women. That the cat is seen as whether that kid realizes it or not, the cat is seen as a feline, a feminine representative. And playing with fire and wetting the bed after age 10 or 11. Those three altogether are trouble.
I'll definitely watch my daughter's husbands.
It's almost like you need a checklist to interview, speed dating.
Right.
It's not, do you enjoy dogs or not? It's, and walks on the beach. It's, can I just ask you 3 questions, please?
You had said about the vampire trucker. With Timothy, when they caught him, if I remember correctly in the book, he was just jabbering and talking incessantly to the female inspector when he got pulled over for his inspection. And that's when they started noticing things and were able to pull up his background when they ran his name and stuff. So certain things that are is the FBI starting to try, and I know I think it was with, was it Catherine Devane, or one of them stated that they're trying to promote the agencies, the different police agencies, different stuff that they can look for, stuff that they can get hints from to try and get that ick factor or whatever you want to call it, to try and further investigate so they could try and catch more?
There's no question that part of the FBI initiative is marketing and training to police departments and to inspectors, truck inspectors, on what to look for. But thank God for those Minnesota DOT inspectors who looked at the scenario when they were inspecting Tim Vafides and his passenger, young lady, in the truck, and they realized something's really wrong. This young girl is not making eye contact and not talking. And this guy, the driver, is talking a mile a minute. Something's not right. And they pulled them out of the truck, and things got so weird that they decided to call the state police, who came in and realized there was a restraining order against this guy. In fact, the young lady in the car had the same first name as the person who had filed the restraining order. It was bizarre, but that was the beginning of the end of Tim Vafides, the vampire killer. Why the vampire? Excuse me, not killer, but the vampire trucker, because we can't determine if he killed, but he certainly kidnapped and raped and tortured numerous women. And he was called vampire because he liked to think he was a vampire. He drilled his teeth into fangs, and he took a power drill to his victims' teeth as well. So yes, the long way of answering that the FBI program involves marketing and training to police departments to get the word out about what to look for and about the existence of the database. Because you can ask many police officers, have you heard of the FBI's Highway Serial Killings Initiative database? And they'll tell you, I have no idea what you're talking about. So part of the job is marketing.
Wow. Frank, here's a small list that's out of your book. Robert Rhodes, Bruce Mendenhall, Jerry Johns, Thomas Likens, Delmas Colvin, Gary Dean Artman, Timothy Vafides, Carl Wayne, John William, Tracy Rollins, Adam Leroy Lane, Raman, I couldn't pronounce that one to save my life, and then James Grimsley. Out of all these and more that you've written about, which one really disturbed you the most? Which one would you say was that you hope he never sees the light of day ever?
Yeah, sadly, the amount of evil that I saw in these particular killers was unprecedented for me. I've seen a lot of evil in my FBI years, bad crime scenes, bloody crime scenes. But the worst were for some reason, were these killers. The worst of the worst was Robert Ben Rhodes. And that's not just me saying that, that's generally accepted. It's why I chose to open my book with Robert Ben Rhodes. He is suspected of having killed as many as 50 women. And perhaps the most gruesome of his killings was 14-year-old Regina Walters, who was hitchhiking with her boyfriend. I often get asked, hey, are all these, why should I care about this? I don't know anybody that's in trafficking. Well, you should care because these people are on the road first. But second, there are victims who are not trafficking victims. So Regina Walters, 14-year-old, hitchhiking with her boyfriend outside of her neighborhood outside of Houston, is picked up by Robert Ben Rhodes, this notorious killer. Her boyfriend is quickly killed by Rhodes because he's just a speed bump on the way to torturing Regina for several weeks across the country. Rhodes had a torture chamber in the back of his cab. He shackled her, hung her by fish hooks, raped her repeatedly, even was so cruel to call her father anonymously and say, hey, I made some changes, I cut her hair. And sure enough, he did cut her hair, because when she was found, her body was found decomposing in an abandoned farmhouse all the way in Illinois. Indeed, her hair was cut into a short bob, and photos were found on Rhodes' camera that he had taken of her, the last photos of Regina Walters alive. And sure enough, you see the short haircut, you see a black cocktail dress, which she didn't own, so he bought it for her, and black high heel shoes, so he bought those for her. He dressed her up, and in the last photo of her alive, she is literally begging for her life. You can see her arms and hands outstretched towards Rhodes. She knows what's coming. She knows she's about to die. This is the most evil trucker in my book.
It really enrages me to even hear this. And it reminds me of a scripture that says, fear not him that can hurt the body or can kill the body, but fear him that can cast body and soul into hell. So there's a special place for Mr. Robert Rhodes and all these guys that hurt innocent young ladies out there on the road. It makes me sick. Ruth Ann, did you have something else?
Well, after reading the book, there is a couple of them that I would definitely say are, I think, like Frank said, just so evil. John Williams was one of them to me when he was being questioned about a particular woman that he had murdered. Well, that was murdered, and they were trying. They really were sure it was him, and they finally showed a tattoo, and he goes, "Oh, little bit." He didn't recognize anything else about this person, but the tattoo that he's seen while he was killing her. That is like, of all things, some of the stuff is just it's more than disheartening. It's just so tragic to see some of them go through so much. And the good thing about it is the opportunities that some of these, like Dr. Cecilia Williamson and Dr. Zepowitz, what they offer these trafficked women that they can try and get out of that industry.
Yeah, so a couple of things. You're right. That story you're telling is the victim there is Casey Jo Pipestem, who was part of the Seminole Nation in Oklahoma. very young woman who was trafficked to truckers and found dead in Grapevine, Texas. And yeah, when you're so cold-hearted or you've killed so many that you can't even remember the photo of one of them unless you're showing a tattoo, that's a problem. There's hope in this book, and perhaps this is a good way to kind of wrap our discussion here. It's not it sounds like a very dark book, and it is, but I always want to leave hope. And the hope comes here in a couple of forms. One, certainly there's hero truckers that we talked about at the start who identify and help these people. Second, there's tremendous resources out there. I visited a place called Starfish Place in Phoenix, Arizona, that's dedicated to helping young women with kids get out of trafficking. It's a phenomenal place. I loved visiting there. There's great work being done in cities around the country, from Toledo, Ohio to Houston, Texas to Las Vegas. It's great partnerships with law enforcement that are really making a difference. But there's hope for women in this trap. And all they need to know is that the resources are there when they're ready, when they've reached the point when they say, I can't do this anymore, I have to get out. There are places of refuge and resource, and that's the positive note I wanted to end the book with.
Frank, we so much appreciate you coming on, and more than just coming on the show, truly shedding light on this, because we're definitely a podcast that cares. We speak our mind here on the show, and sometimes we're popular. Sometimes, we can get some bad mail ourselves. But this is a topic. There's certain topics that people don't want to discuss. They don't want to hear about, but when there's a problem, it's really got to be dealt with. And, just opening up everybody's eyes, just that number 800 and some, number that's on the front of your book, just opens your eyes to go, wow, that the numbers are blown out way more than I'm thinking. And just with numbers that people know, we know that there's obviously more. So thank you so much for shedding a light on something that probably should have had a light put on it. And what was her name, Ruth Ann? Tina, the lady from 2003 that in Oklahoma that actually brought awareness to
Terry Turner.
So thank you to you and for also chalking it up to Terry, also giving her credit. This is something that I find amazing, that human beings actually can be this demented. I don't think people that are doing this have empathy. I don't think they can be rehabilitated. So really the bottom line is we got to learn to start spotting them, and we need to get them off the streets, because like you just said, there's people that are not just in the sex trade. Somebody can be broke down on the side of the road, and, a serial killer stops to help them. Just little bad timings where people have found themselves into. So we all do need to care, and I like that what you said. The book is called Long Haul, Hunting the Highway Serial Killers by former FBI Assistant Director Frank Figliuzzi. Ruth Ann, did you have any last questions for Frank? And
I actually did have a question.
What you got?
I wanted to know, Frank, when you were on the road with Mike, what was your favorite thing about being on the road as a, quote, truck driver? And what was the one thing that you disliked the most? Because from reading your book, I think I know what you might have disliked, but I want to see what your opinions are.
So we had, it's a rough life. It's not the Ritz-Carlton sleeping in that upper bunk in the sleeper berth. I can assure you that. Eating healthy is tough. You got to make that happen. Exercising is tough. The lack of a daily shower for me was rough. Some truckers get it done. They insist on it. Mike did not. It was all about time and money. And we had one night in Columbus, Ohio, in a really bad section of town where we made a decision, or I should say Mike made the decision to sleep on to park us in a lot in front of the building we had to deliver to in the morning. So we could be there first thing in the morning. And the biggest concern that night, quite frankly, was whether we were going to get robbed at gunpoint. That's how rough that night was and what was going on around us. With regard to the best part of it, I loved being in the truck, a kind of flying above traffic. You know, that that view of the world was fascinating to me. The physicality of flatbedding, I enjoyed. Thank God, getting out of the truck, doing some things that are physical and learning. But you know, I left with hope for the future of trucking and respect for truckers. But also, we've got to get better in the trucking industry at hiring and vetting, training and giving benefits, more benefits, incentivizing fitness and wellness. That's got to get done. This is an inherently unhealthy profession, and I offer some solutions to that at the end of the book.
Well, listen, Frank, is there anything that you wanted to close with? Again, the book is called Long Haul, Hunting the Highway Serial Killers by Frank Figliuzzi. Are we pronouncing your name right, Figliuzzi?
You're close enough, as they say, for government work. It's 3 syllables, Figliuzzi. But I do have a couple of real quick closing thoughts. One is, if you're saying this book sounds interesting, but I don't have anyone in my family or circle of friends or network that would ever fall into the trap of trafficking, I would encourage you to read this book, because the women I interviewed, one was a preacher's daughter. One had a year of college, and she lives in the upper Midwest. Good, decent family. It can happen to people you know if there's certain commonalities in place. One of those, of course, is early exposure to drug use. So the other thing is, if you say, I don't need to read this book, I don't have trafficking in my city, I don't have it around me. If you've got intersections of major highways near you, if you've got a major bus station, a train depot, you've got trafficking. I guarantee it. And if you think, well, my daughter, my niece, my granddaughter just would never get caught in this, I'm here to tell you that the new recruiting and grooming for trafficking, despite all the fancy movies we see where, some kid is dragged into a van off the sidewalk, never to be seen again, trafficked internationally. Yeah, that happens, but I'm telling you, it's really rare. You know what's much more common is the young lady ends up falling into this trap because someone in her circle of family or friends on the edge of it starts grooming and recruiting her. And that often gets to a boyfriend situation that turns really bad, and he becomes a boyfriend / pimp. And where does this start happening now? Almost exclusively online. So if you don't know what your kids are doing online, who they're talking with, you really need to change that.
All right. So the book actually is digital also. And you said you mentioned there's it's free on digital with a little subscription, correct?
You can get an audio book if you already have a subscription for Audible through Amazon. Right now, the book is free. It says free with a 3-month trial. So you could, if you don't, you go and you sign up for it, and you could still listen to it for free. But yeah, you can get the book on Amazon.
So Frank Figliuzzi, Long Haul, Hunting the Highway Serial Killers. Audience, get the book and read it. If you're a book reader, it's an interesting read, and it'll open your eyes up to a lot of things, that are out there in the country. And let us know how you like the interview. Ruthann, I think we're out of here.
Peace.
Peace. Praise the Lord.